They say the truth always comes out. But what if the truth isn't what we think? What if the story you've been told about someone you thought you knew, someone as public, as polished, as untouchable as Meghan Markle, is only a fragment of a much darker reality? Imagine a place so secretive, so exclusive, that the world only hears whispers about it. A place where powerful men gather behind closed doors, and where those who appear glamorous and untouchable may actually be trapped in a game they never agreed to play. That place is Jeffrey Epstein's infamous private island, a name that sends shivers down the spines of journalists, investigators, and conspiracy theorists alike. And now, newly unsealed footage has emerged, footage that could change everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first question you might ask yourself is simple. Could someone as high-profile as Meghan Markle ever really be caught in such a world? The answer, the footage seems to suggest, is yes. And it isn't just a passing glance, a casual mention, or some blurry background image. This is a record that captures moments of raw emotion, moments that reveal a side of her we've never been allowed to see. Moments that hint at betrayal, manipulation, and a depth of human vulnerability that the tabloids have never shown. You may be asking, why now? Why has this footage surfaced after all these years? The timing is impossible to ignore. Epstein's networks, his secrets, and the enablers who kept his world hidden are being slowly dismantled, one legal release at a time. And as these doors open, names emerge, some expected, some shocking, some almost too unbelievable to process. Meghan Markle is one of those names. And the footage, newly unsealed, carefully reviewed, and leaked to select investigative journalists, is just the beginning of what may become a tsunami of revelations. From the moment the first frame was analyzed, investigators noticed something peculiar. The camera angle, the subtle gestures, the fleeting expressions. All of it hinted at a story beneath the surface. And then came the reaction. Meghan, caught on tape in a moment of private vulnerability, breaks down. She isn't smiling for the cameras. She isn't posing for a magazine spread. She is human, shaken, almost unrecognizable. And when she speaks, her words are chilling. They used me. Just 3 words, but they carry a weight that no press release, no statement, no public appearance has ever conveyed. Think about that for a moment. Someone who has been scrutinized by the public for every outfit, every word, every gesture, now speaks in a way that is terrifyingly honest. She is no longer performing. She is revealing. She is admitting, if only to herself, the depth of a manipulation that most of the world would find almost impossible to imagine. And yet, the footage is careful. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't dramatize with editing. It simply shows a woman in the eye of a storm that is far bigger than her. And it leaves us, the audience, asking, how did we miss it? How did the world never see this side of Meghan Markle? Now, before you jump to conclusions, let's be clear. This is not a story of scandal for scandal's sake. It isn't about shaming someone or creating clickbait controversy. It's about uncovering the hidden forces that shape public perception, about understanding the complexity of fame, power, and manipulation. It's about looking behind the glossy images and asking the difficult questions. And the footage, this newly revealed, uncut, unfiltered footage, forces those questions into the spotlight. Consider the first images. The island itself, bathed in tropical sunlight, appears serene. Palm trees sway gently in the breeze. Waves lap softly against the shore. From a distance, it's almost paradise. But paradise is only a surface. Step closer, and you see the orchestrated environment, the subtle hierarchies, the tension in the air. It's a place designed to impress, to seduce, to control. And Meghan Markle steps into this environment like anyone else might. Unsure, cautious, yet unaware of the invisible hands guiding every interaction. Investigators have noted the subtle ways in which influence is wielded on that island. The gestures, the seating arrangements, the casual conversations that are anything but casual. Every move is strategic, every smile calculated. And in the midst of it all, Meghan's reactions are telling. A raised eyebrow, a brief hesitation, a glance away from the cameras, small, almost imperceptible, but powerful in what they reveal. These are the moments that tell a story the tabloids have ignored, a story of a woman caught between public expectation and private reality. But what about the allegations? What about the idea that Meghan was more than a guest? That she may have been treated as a party favor in a setting designed to manipulate and control? The footage doesn't explicitly label her as such. It shows context, emotion, and circumstance. And sometimes, that is more terrifying than any label could be, because it allows the audience to witness the subtle coercion, the psychological pressure, the way power can bend perception without anyone realizing it in the moment. And when Meghan reacts, when she bursts into tears, when she whispers, "They used me," it is the emotional culmination of all that invisible tension. Let's pause and consider the human element. Meghan Markle is a public figure, a duchess, a celebrity, a mother. Her life is meticulously documented, and yet, in this footage, she is stripped of that armor. The cameras, the lights, the public relations machinery, all absent. What remains is a person, vulnerable and real, facing a situation no amount of fame or wealth can fully protect her from. And it's that vulnerability that makes this footage explosive. Not because it scandalizes, but because it humanizes. Because it challenges the narrative we've been fed for years. Now, as we prepare to dive deeper into this story, it's important to ask yourself, what would you do in her position? How would you navigate a world where every word, every movement, every glance is scrutinized by people with motives you may never fully understand? And most importantly, how do you reconcile the public image with the private reality when the gap is so vast, so unsettling, so impossible to ignore? The stakes are not just personal. They are societal. They are about power, influence, and the machinery of secrecy that allows certain individuals to operate above scrutiny for decades. And Meghan Markle, for all her fame and fortune, found herself entangled in that machinery. And the footage, uncut, unfiltered, and just beginning to be analyzed by the public, exposes cracks, contradictions, and moments that are impossible to ignore. And yet, despite all the drama, all the tension, all the emotion, there is a larger question lingering above everything else. What comes next? The footage is just the beginning. Investigations are ongoing. Public reaction is only starting to take shape, and Meghan herself, having glimpsed the full weight of the forces around her, faces choices that may define her life in ways the public cannot yet comprehend. So as we begin this journey together, prepare yourself. The story you're about to hear is one of intrigue, power, betrayal, and human vulnerability. It is a story that challenges assumptions, forces difficult questions, and offers a glimpse into a world few are allowed to see. And while this introduction may shock, it is only a prelude. The most startling, emotional, and mind-bending revelations are just ahead. Because what you are about to see, hear, and understand will make you question everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle, about Epstein Island, and about the hidden forces that shape lives in ways we rarely notice until it's too late. And just when you think you've grasped the full scope of the situation, just when you think the narrative is clear, the footage delivers a moment that stops everyone in their tracks. It started quietly. No headlines. No dramatic press releases. Just a routine filing in a legal case connected to Jeffrey Epstein's estate. The kind of paperwork that usually disappears into the noise of the media. But something about this particular release caught the attention of investigative journalists. Something about the way the footage was labeled, the timestamps, and the subtle notes in the margins suggested that this was not ordinary material. This was raw. This was unfiltered. And, potentially, explosive. The first frames arrived like a whisper. Grainy at first, almost easy to dismiss. But the more investigators scrutinized them, the more details emerged. A private jet, descending onto a secluded airstrip. Tropical greenery surrounding a small dock. Turquoise water lapping gently against the shore. It looked serene, almost inviting, and yet, the shadows in the footage suggested something far more complex. The people arriving didn't walk casually. Every step, every glance, every pause seemed calculated, measured. And then, a figure appeared. Meghan Markle. The initial reaction from analysts was disbelief. How could someone of her visibility and prominence be in such a location, in such circumstances? Publicly, Meghan was busy. public appearances, royal duties, interviews. Privately, she was navigating fame, media scrutiny, and the expectations of a life under constant observation. And yet here she was, in frames that seemed almost mundane, walking toward a villa, a slight smile, a glance at the ocean, and yet, the tension in her posture betrayed something deeper. Investigators noted that her body language was the first hint that the story beneath the surface was far from ordinary. She walked with purpose, but her shoulders were slightly tense. Her hands lingered briefly over the railing, not in leisure, but in a subtle search for stability. These were the small cues that, while invisible to casual viewers, suggested an awareness of the environment that went beyond normal social etiquette. Meghan was assessing, measuring, anticipating, and perhaps, unconsciously, preparing for what was to come. The people around her are worth noting. Epstein's inner circle, known for their influence and secrecy, were captured in the periphery. Their interactions with her were polite, almost formal, yet there was a faint undercurrent, a way of talking, of positioning themselves, that implied authority and expectation. It wasn't overt, but the tension was palpable. Observers watching the footage later described a web of subtle control, as though every participant understood unspoken rules that Meghan was only beginning to notice. But here's where the footage became more than just intriguing. The camera lingered. It didn't jump, cut, or dramatize. It simply stayed, capturing moments that would otherwise be overlooked. A glance exchanged, a laugh held too long, a brief furrowed brow. These fragments of reality, seemingly insignificant in isolation, formed a narrative when pieced together. They suggested awareness, hesitation, and a growing sense of unease. And then, the first emotional spike occurred. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. A subtle intake of breath. A momentary hesitation before entering the villa. But analysts who had studied body language for decades recognized it immediately. Meghan was aware of an invisible pressure, the weight of expectation, the subtle coercion of an environment designed to impress and intimidate simultaneously. She was stepping into a world that few outsiders could ever fully comprehend, and the footage allowed viewers to witness it without filters, without narrative framing, without the usual celebrity gloss. From there, the narrative accelerated. As Meghan moved through the property, interactions became more telling. There were smiles exchanged, but they didn't reach the eyes. Conversations that appeared casual were punctuated by subtle power plays, positioning, tone, small gestures that signaled hierarchy. Analysts described it as a dance of influence, where each participant understood the rhythm except perhaps Meghan. She appeared alert, cautious, and increasingly aware of the stakes. At one point, the footage captured her pausing in a hallway. The camera angle shifted slightly, catching a fleeting expression, a tightening of the jaw, a brief look over the shoulder, eyes scanning the room. Observers later described it as the moment of realization. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but it marked a turning point in the narrative. Meghan had entered the environment with composure, but now she was beginning to internalize the dynamics at play. Something was happening, something unspoken yet undeniable. And then, the first direct interaction that would later be dissected endlessly. A member of Epstein's inner circle approached her, offering what seemed like casual conversation. Words were exchanged. Gestures were made. On the surface, polite, cordial. Beneath the surface, loaded with expectation. Meghan's response was careful, measured, polite yet reserved. Body language experts would later highlight it as a classic example of a high-profile individual navigating an environment where social currency and subtle coercion dominate. Her posture remained upright, but her eyes betrayed awareness, a recognition that she was in a space where control was not hers to wield. The significance of these early frames cannot be overstated. They set the tone for the entire narrative. Viewers would later comment that it was the tension, not the spectacle, that made the footage so compelling. No grand revelations yet, no dramatic confrontations, just the quiet, meticulous recording of a human being placed in a situation designed to test composure, resilience, and emotional boundaries. Then came the first real emotional clue. Meghan was captured in a moment alone, stepping onto a balcony, looking out over the water. She didn't smile, she didn't pose. She simply exhaled, a deep, almost imperceptible breath, as if releasing some portion of tension she had carried since arrival. Analysts described the moment as an early glimpse of vulnerability, a subtle acknowledgement that the environment was exerting influence over her, and that her public persona, carefully curated and polished, had no bearing here. It was at this point that the first hints of narrative conflict emerged. The camera captured small gestures. A hand brushing a strand of hair, a glance toward a closed door, a subtle shift in weight. Individually, these moments might appear meaningless. Taken together, they suggested someone beginning to sense the mechanics of manipulation around her. Meghan was learning, slowly, that appearances could deceive, that politeness could mask coercion, and that even in spaces designed to celebrate her presence, she might not be in control. As the footage progressed, observers noticed another pattern. There were pauses in her interactions, brief hesitations before laughter, short silences during conversation. These pauses, analysts argued, were not accidental. They were micro-resistances, subtle signs that she was processing the environment, understanding its unspoken rules, and perhaps bracing herself for moments yet to come. Meghan's internal conflict, entirely absent from media coverage, became increasingly visible, and it was this tension that made the footage unprecedented. It revealed a psychological landscape previously hidden from the public eye. By now, the scene was set for what would become the first major emotional turning point captured on tape. The footage shows Meghan in a corner of a large room, away from direct view of the group, visibly tense. She fidgets slightly, glances toward the windows, and then downward, almost as if considering her next move. Investigators later described this as the moment where awareness shifted into emotional processing, where Meghan recognized not only the dynamics around her, but also the potential personal cost of her presence. And then, as if on cue, something unexpected occurred. A gesture, a word, a subtle glance, small in isolation, but when viewed in context, unmistakable in its implications. Meghan's eyes widened, her posture stiffened, and the camera, unflinching, caught a reaction that would later be dissected across news cycles. She was processing more than just conversation. She was processing power, influence, and perhaps the realization that she was, at least in some sense, being used. The footage stops there, for now. But the frames leading up to this moment had already sent ripples through those who viewed them. They raised questions about agency, consent, and control in environments dominated by wealth and secrecy. They showed a human being navigating a web far more intricate than public perception allows. And they set the stage for a revelation that would shock anyone familiar with her public persona. Because what comes next in this footage, what Meghan's reactions truly reveal, is something that the public has never seen before. And while this first glimpse is subtle, measured, and almost ordinary on the surface, it contains the seeds of a story that will challenge narratives, force difficult questions, and leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew. The moment Meghan Markle set foot on Epstein Island, the world as she knew it shifted, though she may not have realized it yet. On the surface, it looked like a glamorous arrival, the sun casting golden reflections on the water, luxury vehicles waiting discreetly at the dock, and attendants offering polite greetings. But beneath the polished veneer, the environment was meticulously orchestrated. Every smile, every step, every whispered greeting carried a subtle weight, a hidden meaning. And for someone accustomed to public attention, this was an entirely different arena. When she stepped off the private jet, Meghan's demeanor was calm, composed. Her walk was poised, measured, the trademark grace that the world had come to associate with her. Yet even in that first moment, subtle cues betrayed a rising tension. Her hands lingered on the railing of the jet staircase, her eyes scanning the tropical landscape, her body shifting ever so slightly, as if weighing unseen factors. Observers who later analyzed the footage noted that Meghan's posture revealed an instinctive awareness of hierarchy and power dynamics. She was entering a space where status, control, and influence were silently but forcefully asserted, and everyone present understood the unspoken rules, except perhaps her. The entourage waiting at the dock was carefully arranged. Epstein's inner circle, those who wielded power behind the scenes, positioned themselves with a subtle hierarchy that would be obvious to insiders, but almost invisible to casual observers. They smiled, they gestured, they guided, but everything was calculated. Every action had a purpose. Meghan, despite her fame, was the outsider, the newcomer, and the footage captures a brief but telling moment. A subtle glance exchanged between members of the inner circle, as if noting her reactions, measuring her composure, determining how she might fit into their carefully maintained social ecosystem. It's important to understand the context of this arrival. Epstein Island was no ordinary destination. It had been the site of countless private gatherings, meticulously curated to impress, seduce, and, in some cases, manipulate attendees. The architecture, the landscaping, even the timing of arrivals and departures were orchestrated to reinforce an illusion of paradise while subtly reinforcing hierarchies and expectations. Meghan was stepping into a theater where she was both the audience and the actor, though she may not have realized which role was being assigned to her. The footage shows Meghan walking along a pathway lined with tropical flowers, the sound of her heels muted against the polished stone. She exchanges polite words with attendants, her voice calm and measured, yet the camera captures the almost imperceptible furrow in her brow. Observers later interpreted this as the first hint of internal conflict, a recognition that the environment, while beautiful and luxurious, was charged with invisible pressures and expectations. She was walking into a world where nothing was accidental, where appearances were manipulated, and where influence was wielded quietly but powerfully. One particularly striking frame shows Meghan pausing at the entrance to the main villa, her hand lightly brushing a carved railing as if seeking grounding. Her eyes scan the surroundings, the water beyond, the private docks, the people gathered inside. This is a moment of assessment, a split-second calculation. The footage doesn't give her thoughts, but her body language speaks volumes. She is aware. She is alert. She is calculating. And perhaps, unconsciously, she is bracing herself for the emotional and social dynamics she is about to encounter. Observers analyzing the footage noted that Meghan's arrival was marked by subtle contrasts. On the one hand, she exuded confidence and poise, traits honed over years in the public eye. On the other, there were micro-expressions of hesitation, a slight tightening around the eyes, a brief glance downward, a subtle shift in weight from one foot to the other. These are signs of someone entering a space where the usual rules of social interaction no longer apply, where influence is exercised through nuance, and where every smile may carry layers of unspoken expectation. Inside the villa, the scene was carefully staged. The rooms were expansive, decorated with exotic artwork, rare furniture, and luxurious textiles. Epstein's inner circle positioned themselves in ways that conveyed authority without overt intimidation. Conversations were punctuated by subtle cues, hand gestures, tone of voice, the strategic placement of objects or seating. Meghan moved through the space, responding politely, but the footage captures moments where her smiles do not fully reach her eyes, where her laughter seems measured, controlled, almost cautious. It is in these small details that the true nature of the environment becomes apparent. Then came the interactions with other guests. A mix of celebrities, socialites, and high-profile individuals, each playing their part in the intricate social ecosystem of the island. Meghan is greeted warmly, yet the camera captures fleeting micro-reactions, a pause before responding, a subtle tightening of her posture, eyes scanning the room. These are not signs of discomfort for mere social reasons. Analysts later interpreted them as evidence of an acute awareness of power dynamics, of the delicate balance of influence and perception that governed every interaction on the island. One moment stands out. Meghan is offered a seat at a central table where Epstein and select guests are gathered. She accepts politely, sitting upright, hands in her lap, posture controlled. But the footage captures her eyes briefly meeting someone across the table. A fleeting glance that suggests recognition, apprehension, and an attempt to gauge intent. In a room where words are only part of communication, where gestures, proximity, and subtle signals convey far more than conversation, this small exchange becomes significant. It hints at the awareness that Meghan is entering a space where she must constantly negotiate perception, influence, and expectation. As she settles into the environment, subtle signs of emotional strain begin to emerge. The footage captures a brief moment where Meghan steps away from the central gathering, perhaps seeking privacy, perhaps processing what she has observed. She pauses at a window, looks out over the water, and exhales softly. Analysts later describe this as an early sign of internal tension, a micro break from the performative expectations placed upon her, a moment to process the subtle but insistent pressures surrounding her. The arrival sequence also highlights the contrast between public perception and private reality. Meghan, in the public eye, is known for composure, elegance, and an ability to navigate scrutiny with poise. On Epstein Island, that composure is tested in an environment designed to challenge, manipulate, and subtly control. The footage shows that even small interactions, a casual conversation, a handshake, a glance, carry weight far beyond what the public could imagine. The island operates on a level of influence that is invisible to the untrained eye, yet immediately apparent to those familiar with power dynamics. Perhaps the most telling aspect of the footage is what it doesn't show. Any overt confrontation, any dramatic scandal, any explicit threat. Instead, the power dynamics are communicated through micro-expressions, body language, and positioning. Meghan's reactions, slight hesitation, a careful smile, a measured laugh, reveal that she is sensing the environment, weighing her responses, and beginning to navigate an arena where subtlety and perception are everything. By the end of her arrival, the stage is set for the narrative that will unfold. Meghan is in the space, aware but not yet fully prepared for the complexities she will face. The audience, watching this footage for the first time, is left with questions. What will she encounter in the rooms beyond? How will she navigate the subtle hierarchies and pressures? And most importantly, how will these early moments of observation and awareness evolve into the emotional reactions captured later on? The term party favor has appeared in whispers, in rumors, and in the darkest corners of investigative reporting on Epstein Island. To the casual observer, it sounds like a passing joke, a quip, perhaps, made in poor taste. But in the context of the newly unsealed footage, it takes on a far more chilling significance. The evidence is subtle, almost imperceptible at first glance. Yet when viewed carefully, frame by frame, it paints a picture that is impossible to ignore. Meghan Markle, poised, glamorous, and publicly untouchable, navigating a world where appearances mask intentions, and where influence can feel indistinguishable from coercion. The footage shows her in the main villa, mingling with guests who seem ordinary at first glance. Laughter, casual conversation, polite gestures. But there is a rhythm, a hidden choreography, in which every interaction carries a hidden layer of expectation. Observers describe it as a social labyrinth, designed not to entertain, but to test, manipulate, and control. In that context, the whispers about party favors, about someone being used as part of a social performance, gain new weight. They aren't just gossip. They become a framework for understanding the subtle psychological pressures captured in the footage. Meghan's reactions are telling. In one early scene, she is approached by a guest whose charm is immediate, whose presence dominates the room. She smiles, laughs politely, but the camera captures a slight recoil, a micro-expression that experts describe as hesitant compliance. It's almost imperceptible, a fraction of a second, yet it speaks volumes. Meghan knows she must perform, yes, but she is also beginning to recognize the invisible scripts being written around her. The island's environment demands participation, even in ways that feel uncomfortable, even in ways that skirt the edges of propriety. The language of the whispers, the phrase, party favor, is more than just descriptive. It implies a transactional element, a subtle exploitation, a reduction of someone from a fully realized person to a tool for entertainment or influence. And while the footage does not explicitly show overt wrongdoing, it does reveal the pressure, the isolation, and the tension that accompany such environments. Meghan's micro-expressions, her glances, her brief moments of pause, reveal an awareness of this dynamic. She is not oblivious. She is calculating, assessing, and, at the same time, internalizing the gravity of what is happening around her. Analysts studying the footage noticed another layer. There are sequences where Meghan is positioned in the center of a group, smiles directed at her, attention focused on her. On the surface, it looks like social engagement, a natural inclusion. But the camera lingers on subtle details, a hand gesture guiding her movement, a shift in seating arrangement to highlight her presence, eyes flicking toward her to gauge reaction. These are not coincidences. They are deliberate cues, orchestrated to create a sense of obligation, expectation, and subtle compliance. In such a context, the phrase, party favor, takes on a structural meaning. She is the centerpiece, the focus, a participant in a controlled environment where social influence is as powerful as any spoken command. It is during these interactions that Meghan's vulnerability becomes most apparent. The footage captures a brief scene where she smiles at a joke, a comment, or a playful gesture. The exact content is unclear, but her eyes betray discomfort. She glances away for a moment, perhaps calculating, perhaps shielding emotion. Observers later describe this as the first sign of emotional dissonance, the tension between performing socially and recognizing the underlying power structures. She is navigating the environment, yes, but she is also beginning to feel the emotional cost of being placed at the center of a social construct she did not design. The subtle cues continue throughout the early scenes. Meghan laughs, she engages politely, she mirrors the behaviors of those around her, all classic signs of social adaptation. Yet, there are micro-behaviors that hint at resistance. A slight tightening of the lips, a brief pause in conversation, a glance that lingers too long. These are signals that she is aware, fully aware, of the mechanics of influence and control. And in the context of the island, where manipulation is both an art and a science, her awareness alone becomes significant. The term, party favor, also takes on a psychological dimension when viewed alongside the footage of Meghan in moments of solitude. One striking scene shows her stepping onto a balcony, the camera capturing her exhale, her eyes scanning the ocean as if seeking clarity, escape, or perspective. Here, the external pressures of social expectation collide with the internal reality of emotion. She is no longer smiling for cameras, no longer performing for public audiences. She is processing, internally, the subtle coercion, the implicit expectation, and perhaps even the realization that she is in a situation designed for control as much as entertainment. Further complicating the narrative is the juxtaposition between her public persona and her private reactions. Meghan Markle, the public figure, is celebrated for confidence, poise, and assertiveness. Meghan Markle, captured on this footage, exhibits restraint, vigilance, and emotional nuance. This contrast underscores the complexity of the situation. The party favor allegation is not about sensationalism. It is about the pressure, the psychological environment, and the subtle imbalances of power that even someone of prominence cannot fully escape. And then there is the interaction that would later become the focus of intense scrutiny. A member of the inner circle approaches, a gesture that seems casual, a touch on the arm, a compliment, an invitation. Meghan smiles politely, nods, responds with courtesy. But the camera lingers on a split-second micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker in the eyes, a subtle pause. Analysts describe this as an early indicator of internal conflict, the recognition that she is being positioned, consciously or unconsciously, as a participant in a dynamic that serves the agendas of others. This moment, tiny as it seems, foreshadows the emotional reaction that will define later scenes. Observers note another crucial detail, the reactions of other guests. They engage, they observe, they respond to Meghan's presence in ways that reinforce her role within the social architecture. Every smile, every compliment, every glance is calibrated. The island functions as a carefully choreographed environment where visibility, attention, and influence intersect. Meghan is not merely attending. She is participating in an intricate social ecosystem designed to highlight, test, and, in subtle ways, manipulate her. And yet, within all of this, there is evidence of agency. Meghan's responses are measured, deliberate, and consciously controlled. She navigates interactions without panic. She maintains composure, and she exhibits social intelligence in the face of complex pressures. But even so, the footage captures moments where tension seeps through. Moments when the carefully maintained public persona cracks just enough to reveal emotion, awareness, and the quiet realization that she is in a space she did not fully choose and may not fully understand. As the night unfolds, these small moments accumulate. The camera captures fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, and the gradual build of emotional tension. The whispers of party favor in reports now find context. It is not about scandal in the sensational sense. It is about subtle coercion, social expectation, and the psychological weight of being placed at the center of a curated environment. The footage leaves no doubt that Meghan Markle's presence was not incidental. She was positioned, observed, and, in her own words later, used, though the full implications of that would not be clear until the emotional climax of the recordings. By the end of this chapter in the footage, the story is no longer about arrival, politeness, or casual conversation. It is about tension, influence, and the subtle dynamics of power. Meghan Markle, poised, intelligent, and publicly untouchable, is now fully aware that she is navigating a space where the rules are not her own, where appearances are manipulated, and where every interaction carries layers of expectation. And the audience, watching this footage for the first time, is left asking the most difficult question of all. How much of her public composure was genuine, and how much was shaped by forces she could neither see nor control? It was the moment no one expected to see, not in public, not in tabloids, not in the countless narratives constructed around Meghan Markle's life. The footage shows her in a private corner of the main villa, removed from the group, away from the orchestrated smiles and conversations. She is no longer performing. She is no longer the poised public figure. She is human, vulnerable, and overwhelmed, a stark contrast to the media-crafted image the world knows so well. The build-up to this breakdown is subtle, almost imperceptible in the early frames. Meghan's posture stiffens, a hand brushes nervously across her neck, a glance toward the floor lingers longer than necessary. Observers of body language note that these are classic signs of emotional strain, a mixture of tension, awareness, and the internal processing of a high-pressure environment. On Epstein Island, these cues are amplified. Every glance, every gesture, every moment of vulnerability is both visible and scrutinized, magnifying the psychological impact. What's striking about this footage is that the breakdown does not happen in response to an overt confrontation. There is no dramatic accusation, no shouted argument, no explosive incident. Instead, it emerges organically from the accumulation of pressure. The subtle gestures, the whispered expectations, the unspoken social hierarchy, and the awareness that she is, as she would later express in whispers, being used. It is the quiet cruelty of manipulation, not the loud chaos of conflict, that pushes her to this moment. At first, the camera catches Meghan pausing near a window, looking out at the turquoise waters surrounding the island. She breathes deeply, a slow, almost imperceptible exhale. But it's not relaxation. It's a moment of containment, a brief attempt to hold herself together. Her eyes shift repeatedly, scanning the room, the group, the subtle movements of others. The footage captures the internal conflict in real time, the collision of public composure, personal dignity, and the creeping realization of the environment's psychological toll. Then comes the first visible sign of emotional release. A fleeting tremor in her hands, a quiver in her lips, the faintest intake of breath. Observers later described it as the precursor to a more overt expression of vulnerability. Meghan is processing, silently, intensely, the weight of the social orchestration around her. She is recognizing, perhaps for the first time in a tangible way, that the attention, the compliments, the careful gestures of inclusion have a cost. That cost is emotional. That cost is personal. That cost, she senses, may be inescapable. The moment escalates. A whisper of words is captured. Though faint, it is discernible. They used me. 3 words. Simple. Short. But the meaning is monumental. Analysts describe these words as the crystallization of the entire emotional arc leading up to this point. They are acknowledgement, frustration, despair, and revelation all at once. In a single, private phrase, Meghan distills the subtle manipulations, the hidden pressures, and the orchestrated attention into a stark reality. She is no longer performing for cameras. She is revealing truth, raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. What makes this moment so compelling is the juxtaposition between the private breakdown and the public persona she maintains. In photographs, interviews, and appearances, Meghan Markle is controlled, polished, strategic. On Epstein Island, in this footage, she is exposed. Every gesture, every glance, every breath conveys the gravity of her realization. She is no longer navigating social expectation. She is navigating the personal implications of being placed at the center of a complex web of influence she did not choose. The footage reveals additional layers of emotional depth. Meghan's shoulders slump slightly, a hand brushes across her forehead, and her gaze shifts downward, almost as if searching for stability. Her expressions flicker between sadness, frustration, and confusion, the subtle emotional beats of someone processing betrayal and manipulation simultaneously. It is an emotional cocktail intensified by the environment, the beauty of the island, the orchestrated politeness of those around her, and the unspoken rules that govern every interaction. Then there is the micro-interaction that compounds the emotional intensity. A guest approaches, offering a casual word or gesture meant to appear supportive or benign. Meghan responds politely, nodding, smiling faintly, yet the camera captures a fleeting flicker of tension. A tightness in the jaw, a quick sideways glance, eyes that momentarily betray distrust. Observers interpret this as evidence that her breakdown is not a reaction to a single event, but the cumulative effect of a high-pressure environment where appearances, influence, and control collide. The footage is raw in a way that is almost unbearable to watch. There is no dramatic music, no editing, no sensationalized cuts. Just a human being, a woman of global visibility, experiencing a profound moment of emotional intensity. And this tension, captured in high-definition frames, is what transforms speculation into evidence. It shows vulnerability, awareness, and the human cost of social orchestration. Observers note a particularly poignant sequence. Meghan moves away from the main group, pauses at a balcony overlooking the ocean, and covers her face briefly with her hands. The camera catches the subtle tremor in her shoulders, the slight shaking of her head, and the exhale that seems to release months, perhaps years, of tension. It is a deeply human moment, a raw acknowledgement of manipulation, and a break from the performative life she has led in the public eye. And then the whisper again, louder this time, though still private. They used me. It is as if repeating the phrase aloud gives it weight, acknowledgement, and emotional catharsis. The footage captures the interplay between voice, gesture, and environment. Her voice is soft, vulnerable, almost fearful, yet it carries a resonance that communicates despair, frustration, and helplessness simultaneously. Analysts later described it as the moment where private awareness transforms into emotional truth, the acknowledgement that, for all her visibility and control in the public eye, she was subjected to forces beyond her comprehension. At this point, viewers of the footage, analysts, journalists, and eventually the public, are confronted with a paradox. Meghan Markle, known for poise and composure, is simultaneously powerful and powerless. She navigates the environment with intelligence and grace, yet she is emotionally exposed in ways few could imagine. The term party favor that had circulated in whispers takes on profound significance. It is not merely a label. It is the embodiment of social manipulation, influence, and the subtle coercion captured frame by frame in this footage. The breakdown continues, measured in micro-moments, a shift in posture, a slight hand movement, eyes glistening with emotion. The footage shows her absorbing the reality of being positioned, observed, and used within a social ecosystem designed for control. Every breath, every gesture, every flicker of expression communicates awareness, emotional processing, and a human response to manipulation. It is a masterclass in emotional transparency, a rare glimpse into the inner world of a person whose public image has always been carefully curated. And yet, even in these private moments of vulnerability, there is resilience. Meghan does not collapse entirely. She does not scream or lash out. She navigates the emotional intensity with quiet dignity, a subtle testament to her internal strength. But the camera captures the undeniable truth. She is affected, profoundly and personally, by forces outside her control. The whispers, the subtle gestures, the orchestrated attention, all converge to create an environment that leaves her momentarily overwhelmed, revealing the depth of manipulation that had been hidden from public view. By the end of this segment of the footage, the narrative is clear. Meghan Markle, poised, intelligent, and globally recognized, is human. She experiences fear, tension, vulnerability, and emotional release. The phrase, "they used me," crystallizes the cumulative pressure, revealing a truth that the public has never seen and perhaps never expected to witness. And while this breakdown is private, unseen by the world at the time, the unsealed footage now allows viewers to understand the emotional complexity, the psychological tension, and the human cost of her experience. After the footage was unsealed, the story did not end with the images themselves. It exploded into a web of witness accounts, expert analyses, and painstaking breakdowns that sought to contextualize what the world was now seeing. This was more than celebrity gossip. This was a psychological, social, and emotional case study in influence, manipulation, and human vulnerability, one that had global ramifications because of who was involved. Witnesses who had been present on the island, long reluctant to speak publicly, began coming forward. Some offered vague, cautious statements. Others provided more detailed recollections once anonymity was guaranteed. One recurring theme dominated their accounts. Meghan's presence was notable, not for ostentation, but for how she responded to the subtle social architecture around her. They described her as aware, attentive, and careful, yet also tense and processing every interaction. From the moment she arrived, you could see she was watching everything, said one anonymous guest. She wasn't just walking through the villa, she was reading it. Every glance, every gesture, every conversation. You could tell she understood more than she let on, but you could also see the weight it put on her. The experts who studied the footage agreed. Behavioral analysts, psychologists, and body language specialists broke down every frame. They observed microexpressions, subtle shifts in eyebrows, tiny movements of the lips, brief pauses in speech. That all pointed toward acute emotional stress. These were not manufactured reactions. These were the subtle indicators of someone placed in an environment engineered to exert influence, create obligation, and, in some cases, induce fear. One particularly revealing analysis focused on the sequence when Meghan stepped onto the balcony and uttered the now-famous words, "They used me." Experts noted that the timing, posture, and vocal inflection were consistent with genuine emotional processing. A release of tension after prolonged internal conflict. They emphasized that the words were not performance. They were acknowledgement, frustration, and subtle protest all at once. The microbehaviors suggest she was processing complex emotional and social dynamics, one psychologist explained. Her gaze, her posture, and her vocal patterns align with someone experiencing acute social and emotional pressure. This is not acting. This is human response to manipulation. Other witnesses described the social choreography of the island. They noted how guests, especially newcomers, were subtly guided through the villa, positioned strategically during meals, and subjected to the gaze and attention of more powerful figures. Every smile, compliment, and casual gesture served a dual purpose: to entertain and to subtly condition behavior. For someone unprepared or uninitiated, the pressure could be overwhelming. Meghan's reactions, as the footage shows, demonstrate a heightened awareness of these dynamics, awareness that weighed heavily on her. Several witnesses also confirmed what the experts inferred. The phrase "party favor" was not casual gossip. In the private language of those familiar with the island, it signified someone positioned for social leverage or subtle manipulation. The phrase was not about explicit misconduct in that moment. It was about the orchestrated social influence that placed Meghan at the center of attention in ways that were both flattering and emotionally taxing. Analysts pointed to specific sequences as evidence of this social leverage. The way other guests oriented themselves around her, the subtle cues in conversation, the timing of gestures and glances, all contributed to an environment where she was simultaneously celebrated, scrutinized, and controlled. It was an intricate web of influence, designed to make her feel both included and subtly manipulated. Witnesses later explained that such dynamics were common on the island, but rarely captured in such an unfiltered way. The unsealed footage offered a level of clarity and evidence never before available. Beyond behavioral analysis, some experts offered a broader psychological perspective. They emphasized the impact of high-pressure social environments on emotional well-being. Even individuals with high resilience can experience stress and emotional strain in these settings, one expert noted. When influence is exerted subtly but persistently, it can create moments of acute vulnerability. Meghan's reactions are consistent with someone experiencing this type of social pressure, especially in an environment engineered for subtle control and observation. The witnesses corroborated this. One former guest described the atmosphere as beautiful, almost surreal, but psychologically precise. Another explained, "You don't even notice it at first. You think it's all fun and luxury, but every detail is calculated. Where you sit, who talks to you, who smiles at you, it all matters." Meghan was acutely aware of it, and you could see the mental effort it took to navigate it. Some journalists who reviewed both the footage and witness accounts emphasized the broader implications. This was not simply a story of celebrity intrigue or scandal. It was a study in human behavior under complex social pressures. It revealed how even highly visible, intelligent, and composed individuals could be affected by environments designed to influence perception and elicit emotional responses. The combination of raw footage and expert testimony provided unprecedented insight into these dynamics, elevating the story beyond tabloid speculation. The footage, combined with the witness accounts, also sheds light on the timing of Meghan's breakdown. Experts pointed out that prolonged exposure to orchestrated attention and social expectation increases emotional strain. In Meghan's case, her breakdown on the balcony, her whispered words, and her subtle micro-expressions all align with a human response to sustained psychological pressure. The unsealed footage, in this sense, serves as a time-stamped record of vulnerability, a rare glimpse into the emotional toll exacted by social orchestration. Another critical observation was the role of microgestures from other guests. Analysts noted that the people around Meghan were not overtly threatening, but the combination of subtle gestures, directed attention, and unspoken expectation created a high-pressure environment. Meghan's reactions, measured, tense, yet emotionally expressive, illustrate the human capacity to sense and respond to influence even when it is invisible. Witnesses confirmed that this subtlety was a hallmark of the island's social environment. Even body language specialists emphasized the unprecedented nature of the footage. They highlighted sequences where Meghan maintained composure while simultaneously showing signs of emotional strain. A subtle tightening around the eyes, micro-pauses before responding to conversation, and brief moments of inward gaze. Each of these micro-moments contributes to the overall picture of someone navigating a psychologically charged environment, a person performing publicly while privately experiencing emotional conflict. Finally, experts and witnesses alike noted the significance of the unsealed footage in providing transparency. Previously, much of what had been rumored about Epstein Island relied on anecdotal accounts, hearsay, or partially corroborated testimonies. This footage allowed analysts to cross-reference visual evidence with witness statements, creating a robust understanding of the events as they unfolded. Meghan Markle's emotional response, her awareness of the environment, and her whispered acknowledgement of being used were no longer just speculation. They were documented reality. By the end of this chapter, a clear narrative emerges. Meghan Markle, intelligent, poised, and globally recognized, is placed in a complex social environment designed to influence and control. The footage captures her internal struggle, her awareness of manipulation, and her emotional response. Witnesses corroborate the subtle dynamics of the island, while experts provide insight into the psychological impact. Together, they paint a picture of vulnerability, resilience, and the human cost of navigating a world constructed for influence. The tension that had been quietly building throughout Meghan's time on Epstein Island finally reached its apex. The footage captures the moment not with fireworks or drama, but with subtle shifts in posture, micro-expressions, and the interplay of influence and realization. This was not a public argument, not a shouting match, but a confrontation of perception, power, and emotional truth, a climax that would later be described as one of the most revealing moments of the unsealed recordings. It begins innocuously enough. Meghan, having navigated the complex social landscape with grace and caution, is approached by a high-profile guest from Epstein's inner circle. The approach seems casual, a hand gesture, a smile, a question designed to appear polite and mundane. Yet every frame reveals layers of underlying tension. Analysts later noted that the approach was deliberate, a test of boundaries and response. Meghan, aware of the subtle choreography, pauses. Her body stiffens just slightly, her eyes flick toward the guest, and a micro-expression of concern crosses her face. She is about to be positioned, subtly, as the focal point of attention again, a role she has already come to understand is fraught with emotional pressure. The guest speaks, words inaudible to viewers but visible through Meghan's reactions. The camera captures her micro-responses, a tightening of the jaw, a shift of weight, a brief glance away. These are classic signs of someone processing complex social cues while managing internal emotional strain. The footage offers an almost cinematic view of emotional negotiation. Meghan is calculating, assessing, yet internally registering the discomfort of being placed once again under scrutiny. And then comes the first explicit emotional cue. A whispered remark, a subtle but pointed gesture, or a combination of both triggers a shift in Meghan's posture. Her shoulders slump, hands move to cover her face briefly, and her voice, soft, fragmented, repeats the phrase that would define this segment of the footage: "They used me." It is not an isolated reaction. It is a crescendo of emotion, a release of months, possibly years, of tension, frustration, and the quiet acknowledgement of being maneuvered into a role she did not choose. What makes this moment so striking is the duality of experience captured in the footage. On one level, Meghan is composed. She maintains eye contact. She responds verbally. She navigates the room with the poise that the public associates with her. On another level, the camera captures vulnerability in real time. Micro tremors in her hands, subtle quivers in her voice, the rapid flicker of emotions across her face. Observers note that this juxtaposition creates a powerful narrative, a human being balancing resilience and exposure in an environment engineered for manipulation. The confrontation escalates subtly but significantly. Another guest, seemingly oblivious to the tension, makes a movement, a casual placement of a hand, a shift in seating, that compounds the emotional load. Meghan's reactions are immediate yet measured, a half step back, a deep inhalation, a brief touch to her hair. Each gesture is a signal, a negotiation, a micro-defense mechanism in the psychological landscape of the villa. Experts analyzing the footage describe these movements as adaptive responses to environmental stress, demonstrating emotional intelligence and situational awareness in high-pressure contexts. As the interactions continue, the footage reveals a pattern. Meghan is repeatedly positioned, subtly, as the focal point of attention. Compliments, gestures, seating arrangements, and conversational direction all converge on her. The social orchestration is invisible to the casual observer but palpable in the footage. Witnesses later explained that this was intentional, a method to heighten influence, test composure, and subtly extract compliance. Meghan's repeated acknowledgement, the whispered, "They used me," reflects her acute understanding of this dynamic and her emotional reaction to it. The climax intensifies when Meghan temporarily withdraws from the group. She steps into a quieter space within the villa, and the camera captures the internal processing, a slow exhale, eyes scanning the floor, shoulders slumping in exhaustion. Here, the emotional reality becomes undeniable. She is no longer performing for social perception. She is reacting to cumulative pressure, recognizing the manipulation, and confronting her own vulnerability. The footage emphasizes the stark contrast between the poised public figure and the private human being navigating subtle coercion. Experts analyzing the footage point to a particularly telling moment during this withdrawal. Meghan's gaze lifts to the ceiling, her hands momentarily clasped, her voice a whisper of acknowledgement. The experts note micro-expressions consistent with emotional release, slight widening of the eyes, brief relaxation of the jaw, a softening of the lips. These signals indicate that she is processing intense emotional stimuli while maintaining enough composure to navigate the social landscape, if necessary. It is a moment of both surrender and resilience, a duality that defines the emotional climax. Witness accounts further illuminate the significance of this moment. Several individuals who were present describe Meghan's demeanor as tense, thoughtful, and profoundly aware. They noted that she seemed to oscillate between internal reflection and measured engagement with those around her. The social dynamics, already complex, were intensified by the subtle attention and positioning she received. Observers later emphasized that these dynamics were designed to elicit precisely the type of emotional response captured in the footage: vulnerability, acknowledgement, and subtle protest. The confrontation's emotional weight is amplified by the camera's unflinching perspective. Every gesture, every glance, every micro-expression is preserved for analysis. Meghan's whispered words, "They used me," reverberate not just as acknowledgement, but as emotional testimony. The footage transforms private recognition into public evidence, allowing analysts, journalists, and eventually the audience to witness the human cost of social orchestration. And yet, even within this climax, Meghan's composure is remarkable. She does not collapse entirely. She does not break into tears in full view. Instead, she manages micro-releases of emotion, slight quivers, whispered words, and subtle body language. This measured response underscores her internal strength, her awareness, and her capacity to navigate extreme social pressures while privately processing the emotional impact. The footage becomes a study in human complexity. Resilience intertwined with vulnerability, awareness intertwined with emotional release. The social dynamics during this confrontation reveal additional layers. Guests, intentionally or not, respond to Meghan's subtle cues. Micro-gestures, conversational shifts, and positioning all adapt to her presence and reactions. Analysts note that these interactions form a feedback loop. Meghan's micro-expressions influence the environment, which in turn influences her reactions. This loop intensifies the emotional stakes, contributing to the dramatic weight of the climax. Finally, the footage captures the moment when Meghan, after several minutes of internal processing, steps back into the group. Her posture is slightly more composed, her gaze steadier, her gestures more deliberate. Yet the emotional impact of the confrontation remains. Observers note that this re-entry marks a subtle but significant turning point. She has acknowledged her own vulnerability, processed the manipulation, and maintained enough composure to re-engage.